Karoline Leavitt was no stranger to public attention. As one of the youngest and most outspoken political figures in America, she had built a reputation for fearless debates, sharp rebuttals, and unwavering beliefs. Whether it was challenging mainstream media narratives or standing firm in high-pressure political arenas, she had become a symbol of resilience and conviction. But that day, it wasn't a journalist or a political opponent who stopped her. It was a little boy. And what happened next would restore faith in humanity. Karoline was walking through Boston's Quincy Market, enjoying a rare break from her hectic schedule. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fresh-baked pretzels and roasted chestnuts, and the cobblestone streets were bustling with tourists, families, and street performers. She was wearing a simple navy blue coat, her blonde hair neatly pulled back, her sunglasses shielding her from curious glances. She wasn't here to make a statement or give a speech. She was just a person, out in public, trying to enjoy a moment of peace. But that peace wouldn't last long. As she walked past a small coffee shop, she heard a small, hesitant voice call out, "Miss Leavitt." She turned, expecting to see a political supporter or maybe even a reporter. Instead, she saw a little boy, no older than 7, standing nervously on the sidewalk. He had messy brown hair, a slightly oversized jacket, and bright, curious eyes that held a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. His mother stood behind him, watching cautiously, as if unsure whether approaching Karoline was a good idea. For a moment, Karoline hesitated. She had been stopped in public before, but never by a child. She removed her sunglasses, smiled, and crouched slightly to his level. "Yes, that's me," she said warmly. "And what's your name?" The boy shifted on his feet, looking up at her with a seriousness far beyond his years. "My name is Ethan," he said. "I have a question for you." Karoline smiled. "All right, Ethan. I'm listening." What he said next would leave her speechless. Ethan took a deep breath, his small hands clenched into fists as if building up the courage to speak. "My dad says people in the government don't care about us," he said. "Is that true?" The crowd around them quieted. A few people nearby paused mid-conversation, their curiosity piqued. Even Karoline felt caught off guard. She had been asked tough questions before, by journalists, by critics, by political opponents. But never by a 7-year-old child, asking with such innocent sincerity. She could have given a political answer, something polished and rehearsed. But looking at Ethan, a child just trying to understand the world he was growing up in, she knew this moment deserved more than that. It deserved the truth. Karoline took a deep breath and looked Ethan straight in the eye. "That's a very important question," she said gently. "And I won't lie to you. Some people in government don't care. Some of them forget about the people they are supposed to serve." Ethan's eyes widened. He hadn't expected her to admit that. Neither had the people listening nearby. "But," she continued, "there are also people who do care. People who fight every day to make things better. Not for money, not for power, but because they believe in doing what's right." Ethan nodded slowly, as if processing every word. Karoline smiled. "And I'll tell you something else." She leaned in slightly. "People like your dad, the ones who work hard, raise their families, and try to do the right thing, they matter more than any politician ever will." Ethan blinked. "Really?" Karoline nodded. "Yes. Because no law, no government, no leader can replace what good parents teach their kids. Your dad sounds like a smart man." He's teaching you to ask questions and think for yourself. That's what makes a country strong. Not the people in power, but the people who care about each other. A few people in the crowd softly murmured in agreement. Ethan's mother, who had been standing silently nearby, suddenly looked on the verge of tears. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he took a step forward and hugged her. Karoline was completely caught off guard. She wasn't a stranger to political debates. She had gone head-to-head with journalists, critics, even seasoned politicians. But she wasn't prepared for a child to hug her out of pure gratitude. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling a lump form in her throat. The world of politics was filled with division, anger, and endless debates. But in that moment, standing on a crowded sidewalk, none of that mattered. All that mattered was one little boy who just wanted to believe that people still cared. Ethan finally pulled back, looking up at her with a bright, hopeful smile. "Thank you, Miss Leavitt." Karoline smiled. "No, Ethan. Thank you." As Ethan and his mother walked away, Karoline stood there, watching them disappear into the crowd. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A renewed faith in why she had chosen this path. Politics wasn't about winning arguments on television. It wasn't about headlines, polls, or elections. It was about real people. People like Ethan. People like his father. People who just wanted to know that someone, anyone, was listening. As she turned to continue her walk, a man passing by patted her on the shoulder. "We need more people like you in office," he said simply before disappearing into the crowd. Karoline didn't answer. She just smiled. Because for the first time in a long time, she didn't need a headline or a debate to feel like she was making a difference. All it took was one little boy and one simple question. Karoline Leavitt walked away from Quincy Market with a different energy than before. For years, she had been caught in the noise of politics, the constant debates, the media spin, the never-ending battle for influence. But today was different. Today wasn't about a speech, a headline, or a debate. Today was about a little boy named Ethan, who had asked a question that cut deeper than any political attack ever could. And the way she had answered, from the heart, without spin or strategy, was about to change everything. Karoline thought the encounter was just a quiet, personal moment. But she didn't realize that someone in the crowd had recorded the entire conversation. Within hours, the video had made its way to social media. And within a day, it was everywhere. Fire, Karoline Leavitt's heartfelt moment with a little boy. Watch this. Fire, politicians should take notes. This is how you talk to the American people. Fire, this little boy's question left Karoline speechless, and her response was perfect. The video showed everything: Ethan's nervousness, his powerful question, and Karoline's raw, honest response. It wasn't a rehearsed campaign moment. It wasn't a political stunt. It was real. And the world took notice. Within 24 hours, millions of people had seen the video. And the response was overwhelming. Heavy checkmark, supporters flooded the comments. "This is the most genuine thing I've seen from a politician in years." She could have dodged the question, but she gave that little boy the truth. "I respect that. This is leadership. Not rehearsed, not scripted, just real." Crossmark, of course. Critics emerged too. "She's just doing this for PR. One nice moment doesn't erase her political views." Typical politician, pretending to care when the cameras are rolling. But for once, the negativity wasn't enough to drown out the message. Because this wasn't about politics. This was about something bigger. This was about humanity. And for the first time in years, people from both sides of the aisle were agreeing on something. The next morning, Karoline's phone rang. Her assistant, Emily, sounded breathless. "You need to see this." Karoline rubbed her eyes, still half asleep. "See what?" "Ethan's mom just posted something. You're not going to believe it." Karoline sat up in bed, grabbed her laptop, and opened Twitter. Right there, at the top of the trending feed, was a post from Ethan's mother. "I never thought a politician would change the way I see the world. But today, Karoline Leavitt restored my faith in leadership. My son walked away from that conversation believing in something bigger than politics. He believes that people in power can actually care. Thank you, at Cleveton. You gave my son hope today. And in doing so, you gave it to me too." Karoline read the message twice. Then 3 times. Her chest tightened. Because she wasn't expecting this. She had gone her entire career expecting pushback, criticism, and attacks. She had learned to expect mistrust. But what she never expected was for a single conversation to actually change someone's heart. And yet, here it was. The next thing Karoline knew, news stations were calling. Fox News, CNN, NBC, the New York Times, they all wanted an interview. Tell us about that moment. Did you expect this reaction? What would you say to people who think it was staged? Karoline could have done the usual. She could have gone on TV, used this moment for political gain, and turned it into a campaign message. But she didn't. Instead, she did something nobody expected. She declined every interview. She didn't want to turn a genuine moment into a media circus. She just posted a single message. "Ethan is the reason I do what I do. I have nothing else to add. No PR spin. No talking points. Just the truth." And that, more than anything, made people believe in her even more. 2 days later, Karoline was sitting in her Washington, D.C. office when there was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," she said, looking up. To her shock, Ethan and his mother walked in. "Ethan." Karoline stood, surprised. His mother smiled. "He wanted to see you again. In person." Karoline crouched down to Ethan's level, just like she had in Quincy Market. "Hey, buddy. What's up?" Ethan fidgeted for a moment, then pulled something from his pocket. It was a hand-drawn picture. On it was a stick-figure version of Karoline standing next to a little boy. At the top, in shaky, childlike handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for listening." Karoline felt tears sting her eyes. She looked at Ethan, and her voice was soft. "This means more to me than you know." Ethan smiled. "I told my dad you care. And now he believes it too." Karoline swallowed hard. "That's the best thing I've heard all week." Ethan's mother smiled warmly. "You gave my son hope, Miss Leavitt. And when you give a child hope, you change the world more than any law ever could." Karoline nodded. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Karoline Leavitt sat at her desk, staring at the drawing Ethan had given her. It was just a simple picture, a child's sketch of her standing next to a little boy, but somehow it meant more than any award, any political victory, or any headline she had ever received. because for the first time in a long time, she had been reminded of why she started this journey in the first place. Politics had a way of pulling people into a world of power struggles and endless debates. It was easy to forget that real leadership wasn't about winning arguments. It was about making a difference in people's lives. And in one quiet moment on a sidewalk, a 7-year-old boy had reminded her of that truth. She placed the drawing in a frame on her desk. It would stay there as a reminder that, no matter how chaotic things got, her responsibility was always to the people. And as she would soon find out, Ethan's message was only just beginning to make an impact. The next morning, Karoline's assistant knocked on her office door. "You have a call," she said. "It's from the White House." Karoline raised an eyebrow. It wasn't unusual for her to receive government calls, but this one felt different. She picked up the phone. "Karoline," a familiar voice said. "This is the President." She sat up straight, surprised. "Mr. President, it's good to hear from you." "I just watched that video," he said. "The one with the little boy." Karoline had almost forgotten about it. The viral moment had taken on a life of its own, but she had tried to keep herself out of the media frenzy. "What you said to that child," the president continued, "was something every leader in this country needs to hear." Karoline stayed quiet, waiting. "I want you to come to the White House," he said. "We're working on new community outreach programs, and I think you should be a part of them. I don't want this to be just another viral moment. I want to turn it into something real." Karoline exhaled slowly. This wasn't just an invitation. It was an opportunity to make real change. She thought about Ethan, about his question, about the hope in his eyes when she told him that people still cared. And she knew her answer before she even spoke. "I'd be honored, Mr. President." The conversation with the president set off a chain of events that Karoline never expected. Over the next few weeks, she began working with schools, community centers, and youth programs across the country. Her focus was simple: to remind children that their voices mattered. She visited classrooms, spoke with young students, and encouraged them to ask questions, just like Ethan had. And with every visit, she saw the same spark she had seen in that little boy's eyes. This wasn't about policy. It wasn't about elections. It was about inspiring the next generation to believe in their own power. And soon, something unexpected happened. Letters began pouring into her office. Not from politicians. Not from reporters. From children. They wrote about their dreams. They wrote about their fears. They wrote about the things they wished leaders would listen to. And as Karoline read each one, she realized that Ethan had started something much bigger than a single conversation. He had started a movement. Months passed, and Karoline continued her work. But no matter how many schools she visited or how many programs she helped create, she never forgot the little boy who started it all. And then, one day, she got a letter in the mail. There was no return address, just a small, handwritten note inside. It was from Ethan's mother. It read, "We never got the chance to thank you properly. Ethan still talks about that day. He keeps your picture on his wall. He says you made him believe in good people. If you ever find yourself in our town again, we'd love to see you." Karoline smiled. She knew exactly what she needed to do. 2 weeks later, Karoline found herself back in Boston, standing outside the same coffee shop where she had first met Ethan. This time, she wasn't alone. She had arranged a small event at the community center nearby, where she would speak to local families and answer children's questions, just like she had with Ethan. And when she walked in, she saw him. Ethan was sitting in the front row, his legs swinging back and forth, his bright eyes lighting up as soon as he saw her. She smiled and waved. He grinned back. After she finished speaking, he ran up to her, just like he had before. "You came back," he said. "I promised I would, didn't I?" she replied. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out another drawing. This one showed a stick figure version of Karoline standing in front of a group of children. Above it, in large letters, he had written, "People who care make the world better." Karoline felt a lump in her throat. She looked down at Ethan and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're going to do great things someday," she said. He smiled. "Maybe I'll be president." She laughed. "You just might be." And in that moment she knew. No matter where her career took her, no matter how big or small her victories were, this moment would always be the one that mattered most. Because true leadership wasn't about power. It was about listening, caring, and inspiring others to believe in something bigger than themselves. And a little boy had reminded her of that when she needed it most.